Who were you before you lost your wild self?
That's what we're helping you explore on the Tend Her Wild podcast.
Through questions and tools around how best to listen to your inner voice,
rewild ourselves, and live the most authentic life where we thrive instead of survive.
I'm Betsy.
And I'm Kate.
And we're so glad you've joined us for this episode. Hello, Tend Her Wild podcast listeners. We're here today with a special guest in our space, Dr. Ren Stinson. Dr. Ren is a psychologist with 14 years of experience, and he specializes with adults on trauma-focused care, family of origin concerns, and multicultural issues related to gender, race, sexual orientation, social class, and international living. Ren was born a multiracial third culture kid in Tokyo, Japan. He lived in Oakland, California during his early childhood, and he attended international school in Japan as a teenager. He's now lived in the Midwest for the last 20 years. He loves biking, practicing yoga, and spending time with his wife, friends, and 2 cats. We heard about one of those cats just recently who sits with you while you do therapy. Welcome, Ren. We're so excited to have this conversation. Yeah.
Well, we got a little sneak peek in that bio, but you know, Ren, if you listen, that we always like to start with those first 10 years. Mm-hmm. It sounds like yours were incredibly interesting and may have kind of led some groundwork for your future work.
Yeah. So you want to hear about the first 10 years?
Yeah. Tell us what it was like. What were some big moments or big experiences that shaped you?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, sometimes I have to explain this to people because I've had a little bit of an unusual upbringing in most of the spaces that I've lived in. So yeah, I grew up in the Bay Area in Oakland, California, but actually I was born in Japan. My mom is Japanese. And probably, honestly, a lot of it starts with being born in Japan. Mm-hmm. And, there's a kind of interesting narrative that being biracial, you never really fit in any space. Even in Japan, I didn't really fully fit in because I've lived there before. And then in the States, you don't always fit in all these spaces. And it was kind of true even when I was born, because my mom named me Ren. And the deal with my parents, so my dad's a white guy from Chicago, essentially. Mm-hmm. And the deal with my parents was she got to pick the first name. I have 2 siblings. And then he could pick the middle name. And then we kind of got his last name. And so she picked Ren. And have I ever talked to you about that?
No, I've never,
So Ren... So at the time in Japan, it was a very weird name to pick. There's actually a list. It's called a koseki. It's a list of names you're allowed to pick, actually.
Wow.
And it was not on the list. So my mom was defiant of this list.
About her.
But Ren means lotus in Japanese. And so it comes from these Buddhist sutras. And especially for a boy, that's not a normal name. Mm-hmm. Even in English, it would be Lotus. That's an interesting name for a boy. So in Japan, it wasn't. And since you had to pick from this list, she actually had to get permission. So she doesn't like getting permission. My mom, luckily, her father was a pretty prominent judge. So I think she pulled some strings, and she actually had my name added to the koseki, this list of names, just so that she could name me Ren. Really? Because if you don't do that, you're counted as a foreigner. And actually, I was born with Japanese citizenship and American citizenship. And so that was really important to her. Mm-hmm. The weird story, fast forward a bunch of years, in the 90s sometime, the number one first name for boys in Japan was Ren.
No way.
Which is
she
so
started
weird.
the trend.
Yeah,
Because of your mom.
Like, you started all this, like, somehow. And I've actually met people, like, I've had clients with their kids, like, from Japan, because I work with a lot of international folks, where their kids are named Ren. And I'm like, I don't usually get into it, but in my head, I'm like, I'm the first one.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what was it about that name that she was so adamant about? I mean, it's a lovely meaning, like Lotus.
Yeah.
Why did she feel like that name had to be yours? I mean, she had to jump through a lot of hoops.
Yeah. Well, my mom is very adamant about things in general. Like, she's a very intuitive person. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when she knows she wants something, she just like, she knows that. And so I think, to be honest, she never really explained it to me. I think it was always just very intuitive. She's practicing Buddhist, so I think that was part of it. It never really dawned on me. So there's going to be a lot of time jumps here, but
it's great.
Fast forward, when I was in college, I wasn't the best student in the world, and I was kind of giving a hard, like I was kind of misbehaving, I think, or something, in one of my religion classes, and it was taught by like an Indian, like a woman from India, and it was like world religions or something like that. I don't even remember, but for some reason she made me come to her office, and I knew I was in really serious trouble. And I don't even remember why, but I was kind of a class clown type of person. And so I thought she was going to throw the book at me and she was going to get me into trouble. And she this is like the sign of a really good teacher. She just stared at me for a while, and then she said, "Ren, do you know what your name means?" And I was like, Lotus. And she's like, "Yeah, do you know what the lotus is?" And so she gave me this like full on theological explanation from like a true Buddhist India perspective of like the meaning of lotus. And my big takeaway was this like the lotus is this beautiful flower that rises above this kind of swamp, essentially. And she didn't say anything, like the teacher. She just kind of like implied like, maybe live up to your name.
Yeah, sounds like it.
And I just like, it worked, because after that I was like really good student and I paid attention. And but that was, weirdly enough, that was the first time it kind of clicked in my head. And then I thought about it and I was like, oh, that's really cool. Because to be honest, and this gets into some of the stuff we'll probably talk about with masculinity, I didn't love my name, because when people ask, what does it mean? Like also being especially when I lived in the States, like no one knew what it was. For a while, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, there was like a show called Ren and Stimpy. So it always got like teased about that. Sometimes people would say like that's a girl's name, because WREN sometimes is a girl's name. So I don't know if I would like shame, but
you didn't love it.
I didn't love the attention around it. I didn't love explaining it. Technically in Japanese, it's pronounced even differently. So it's like everyone's pronouncing it wrong. And then when people asked what it meant, like I had to add on like, oh, it's a lotus flower. And then people are like, on my hockey team are like, lotus flower? So it was kind of this first moment that I actually felt really proud of it. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Because I think being in college, I started having, my consciousness was starting to expand, and I was starting to see problems in the world and realize like, yeah, the world does feel pretty murky sometimes. And I don't know, there's this, like I got the message from Buddhism. I was like, oh, that's what they're talking about. Like there's this promise or hope that we can be a beautiful flower that rises above it.
It's really symbolic.
It so is. Your name is like you. Like
that's why
your mom
she's a bit prophetic in many ways. Like I could go on about stories about things she's predicted in the future, not just about me.
So did you stay in Japan for many years before moving to the States?
Yeah, good question. So no, not really. So I was born there. Pretty soon afterwards, they moved back to the States, but we were quite nomadic. So I don't even know if we actually had a house or anything. My parents at the time, so they met in like on at the Berkeley campus before I was born, and they were really heavily involved in the anti-nuclear peace movement at the time. And so they basically spent the early years of my life going around on these peace marches all over the country, and then eventually in other places in the world, like in Japan and other places.
Wow.
And it was kind of this interesting crew of people. And this went into my early childhood. Like, I have memories of this, mostly complaining because I was a kid and I didn't want to go like walking across, South Dakota or something. So it was this interesting group of like multicultural, interreligious group too. So there were Catholic nuns and priests. There were Buddhist, monks. There was this huge group of folks from the American Indian movement, if you know, like the civil rights movement in the American Indian community. And then you just had like other people that believed in this cause. And so that was kind of my childhood. It was like wandering around doing this anti-nuclear thing. And, of course, at the time I was not like, yeah, I believe in this. I was more like, I want to take a nap. But yeah, there's kind of these fun news articles that my parents loved to show me. Because when I was a baby, there was like, I think one of the first ones we went on, I was an infant and it was like winter. I don't know where we were. It was somewhere in a colder part of the United States. And because they had one of those Snugglies, and so everyone wanted to carry me because I was just warm and also like a cute baby.
You were cute,
yeah. And so then it became like, I kind of became this like emblem.
Mascot.
Yeah. Like there's all these news articles. It's like a monk holding this baby, right? Which is a pretty good image. And so, yeah, that was, and my parents take a lot of pride in, they're like, wow, you were like this magic baby or something. So, in a way that was like the narrative growing up. But to be honest, like as a kid, I didn't really want, I didn't really want that. And I think it had an impact on me, not necessarily negative, but just like an impact. Like, I don't love attention very much. Like, I try to stay out of those type of limelight situations. And I often wonder if that those early experiences kind of had an impact on me.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But then we lived in California for most of my early childhood. We would go back and forth to Japan. And I went to grade school there for briefly in 4th grade and then came back. But mostly in the Bay Area. And my dad is actually a United Methodist minister. He was going to become a priest, actually, a Franciscan priest, until he met my mom, and then he changed his plans.
That wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, I went
Buddhist Japanese woman.
Yeah, so then he changed his plans. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing about my childhood that I didn't realize was, I guess, unusual. Especially when I moved to the Midwest, it was more unusual here, which is both of my parents were actively their own kind of religions. So my dad was a, Christian minister, and my mom is Buddhist, kind of activist, I guess you would say, feminist activist. And, but they were very, as far as I could tell, super supportive. When we were in Japan, we would go to temples and shrines. And my dad would be there, clapping his hands together, doing a prayer. And then my mom would go to church with us. She would fall asleep sometimes during my dad's sermons, which was always a good thing.
Your mom.
But she would still go, and I never really heard her complain or criticize it at all. She really loved the people there.
Sounds very equal, kind of an equal relationship where they honored each other.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm sure there was problems that I didn't know about, but they I think the thing that was modeled really well on a bigger scale was that's not really a paradox. Or I think we think of that as some sort of you can't like you can't have two religions at the same time or something like that.
Family,
and somehow that just wasn't an issue in my, like, I really never remember it ever. I mean, maybe it was, but I don't remember that ever being conveyed to us. It was just like, this is just what we do. And some of that probably has to do with, like, I know my mom's father, my grandfather on my Japanese side was actually Catholic
Okay.
and Buddhist.
Really?
Which is kind of a thing in Japan. He's like a Zen Catholic, which you kind of hear that every once in a while.
Maybe I could become that.
Yeah. Like he would write like haikus and then also like rosary at the same time. You know, like he was kind of like
Cool.
And so I think she actually technically grew up Catholic. So I think it just wasn't,
it's not a big deal.
for her. And in Japan, that is a cultural thing. Japan's home religion, Shintoism, is like polytheistic. So they believe there are spirits in just everything, every person, every like physical thing, every natural thing has a spirit in it. So when, like, Japan's one of the only developed countries in the world where Christian missionaries haven't really had a big impact. Like there's still a very small percentage of Japanese people who claim to be Christian. And some people think it's because a lot of Christian, you know, religions want you to be exclusively Christian, like monotheistic. There's only one God. And it's almost like it doesn't make sense to Japanese people. They're like, well, we like your Jesus and stuff. And we just add it on?
We'll take him in.
Because already most Japanese people would describe themselves as both Buddhist and Shinto. Like they just do different things. So
they pull what they need from.
Yeah, and it's just not a conflict.
Yeah.
They're just like, oh yeah, yeah.
So I'm curious for you growing up, what it was like growing up in a biracial family, as a young man growing up in California. What did you face? What was it like?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think in some ways I was really lucky because the Bay Area is pretty multicultural.
Yeah.
And I went to like public schools. And so being a biracial kid and being a kid of color was not weird at all. So I didn't really recognize, you know, like I didn't have like a lot of strong feelings about that. I mean, like growing up as a kid, there's just, you know, people tease each other on the playground and stuff like that. And there's racism that people you see and feel. And there were probably more in that community. There were probably, you know, I think I had more peers and friends who grew up in somewhat similar families, maybe a little less international, but and then, you know, growing up as a boy, that, you know, I think that's also something I have to give credit to my parents is they were never really, they never like over attached to gender stereotypes or roles. And they were also just they just like gave me a lot of permission to do whatever I felt I wanted. So like I have memories as a kid, and there's like photos of this, of, you know, like putting on all my mom's dresses, and like she had like this wig that I think she wore for Halloween or something, and it was like this big curly wig, and I would like put on all her makeup, and I would just like walk around the house like that was just normal, like just in drag. I feel like I know what drag was. And I would just walk around, and my sister, who's 3 years younger than me, like loved it. So she would like also put on makeup and walk around with me. And there was never any like side eye, no criticism. In fact, it was kind of like celebrated. And I don't think I realized that wasn't the case in most spaces until I got a lot older. But then, you know, this was like before adolescence, I think. You know, I played a lot of sports growing up, and I think that's when I started noticing it, you know, probably more like 13, 14.
Hockey.
Yep.
Hockey.
Yeah. And so I played hockey. I played soccer when I was younger, but hockey, I was a really big hockey player. And, you know, hockey culture is not.
It's just that hockey game. It's intense.
Yeah. It's like a lot of sports where there's different characters in it. So you have some, like I remember I had some coaches who I felt were really good coaches and modeled kind of a healthy, expansive form of masculinity. And then I had some coaches that weren't and I like is almost traumatic, like that I felt like were really toxic in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And, you know, same, like, I don't really blame the kids because I feel like we take a lot of the leads from the adults, but, you know, like oftentimes the kids and the team would follow those leads, right? And, you know, even as a kid, I always remember, you know, when sexism or homophobia or something or would show up in the locker room, I'm sure I probably participated on some level, but like I always remember feeling deeply uncomfortable with it, like not knowing what to do, right? Like just feeling like what do you do when, especially when it's a coach who's saying something that feels really offensive or just and you don't even know why you feel uncomfortable when you're that young, you know.
But you could sense the wrong.
Yeah, it just feels like icky, you know. I didn't even know if I would have the articulation to say like right or wrong. It's like I don't like being here, you know, like I don't know why, and it didn't really figure it out till a lot later.
So what was it that finally kind of brought you into this idea that I want to study psychology, I want to become a psychologist? And I know Kate and I, when we were reading your bio, she's like, he's training in a multicultural feminist perspective. We got to talk about that.
I've not read that. Even for women, I don't see that a lot. Like put out there, and I love that.
Yeah, we should talk about.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. So
that's mostly women who helped me with that.
Yeah, but
we'll talk about that.
So when you decided this is the route I want to go, and how do you think your early experiences informed that choice?
Yeah. So you know, I mean, there's lots of, you know, some of it was just luck, I guess, you know, like I started my PhD program right out of undergrad. So, and some of it, you know, in undergrad, I tried out a bunch of different majors and just happened to really like psychology. I knew I liked psychology. I took psychology class in high school. And there was a couple signs along the way. Like I had friends who were like, have you ever thought about being a therapist? Like those type of experiences.
If you were the kind of friend that
usually it was at parties when we were drunk and like I was helping somebody through like a crying spell about their parents, you know, some of my guy friends. And they're like, you should be a therapist, man. You're so great. And I'm like, oh, maybe I should. And so it kind of like stuck there. And then, you know, I had some really great mentors in undergrad who really encouraged me as well and kind of saw that there was something I was good at and passionate about. And I mean, I really had no idea what I was doing. And so they were the ones who were like, I didn't know you could go get a PhD even. So they kind of guided me through that. Amazing. And then I happened to get into the program here at Iowa, which is the same one Betsy went.
Yeah.
Had you ever been to Iowa?
Yeah, I think I like went mountain biking in Iowa City once in college, but other than that, not really. Because I went to school in Illinois.
Oh, that's right.
But other than that, yeah, I don't know if I'd ever been. I didn't know anything about. I mean, I didn't know what the Hawkeyes were. I'm not really like. I wasn't really in that. I mean, especially I lived in Japan in high school too, and so like I kind of had no cultural connections to a lot of things in the United States. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I went. So I went to grad school, and then I did art, you know, I knew I had some interest. So there was a professor in grad school who was doing research on issues around masculinity and social class.
Is that Will?
Yeah.
Will-u.
So Will-u. Mm-hmm. And I didn't, you know, once again, these are those interesting moments where it's like probably more intuitive than sort of conscious thinking.
Yeah.
But I just knew, I was like, I want to work with that guy.
When you started talking today, I was like, guys, I was thinking about Will. And I was wondering, I'm like, I wonder if he worked with Will. So I can see.
Yeah, he was like my research mentor and my advisor. So, and Will, so I applied to work directly with him, got into the program, started working with him. And, you know, I was learning a lot because I didn't know anything really academically. It was more just life experience and my mom, because she is like she's basically a feminist activist in Japan. And so, you know, you learn stuff through that.
Absolutely.
But but it was really eye-opening. And like my dissertation ended up being about like I worked at the shelter house here as a counselor, and I did my dissertation with the population there of men, because I just noticed how much this cross-section of social class and masculinity played out. So many of the men I worked with were dealing with really intense shame about not being able to meet societal expectations of what they thought it meant to be a man, which usually had something to do with being a provider.
Yeah.
Right.
And so if you can't make money, you can't live up to that. And it was almost like the rug was just pulled out from under them psychologically, let alone like, economically as well. And it was just interesting how often it just kept coming up in the therapy work that I was doing. And so I ended up doing a qualitative study, finding out a lot more of like what other aspects of masculinity were being challenged by this situation, which, I think your original, kind of how does, in our culture now, I feel like we see that in a lot of ways. Like we have a lot of economic problems in our culture. And I often think about some of that work that I did and how much does shame play a role for men in our culture, and also how a lot of men don't. You also saw this at the shelter, which is a lot of men aren't taught how to deal with shame and embarrassment really well. Like a lot of men externalize that or turn it in, but don't know how to just like acknowledge that feeling.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you see people get like intensely depressed, and sometimes you see people get very angry and start blaming. And we see that. I feel like we see that a lot. And sometimes people are capitalizing off of that. It's like, here, let's give you somebody to blame for your situation of like not being able to live up to the norms of our society.
I mean, shame, it's such a huge topic. And I know it goes across genders, but I would love to hear just your perspective on how many men do you think really are struggling with shame? And now we're in this totally polarized time.
Yeah.
Very patriarchal, systemic, lots of anger. How much is shame driving some of what's going on?
I think it plays a big role. It's, I work with a lot of men, and I think we do often get to shame. It's not usually the first emotion because a lot of men don't.
It's buried a little deeper.
Yeah, myself included. I don't think I was taught well how to deal with shame. The example I always give the guys that I work with is it's kind of like the little boy on the playground, he's playing a soccer game and trips right in front of his teammates. And usually he doesn't fall down and say, "Oh, that was really embarrassing." Usually it's like, stupid, like ground, and like punching the ground. And I think a lot of guys relate to that like the primary emotion is shame, but we have this like almost built-in thing to like, we want to find some more appropriate emotion to express in front of our peers. And so anger oftentimes is a more acceptable emotion. And if you kind of zoom forward to adulthood, like I feel like we see that a lot, and sometimes in really problematic ways. So yeah, I think it plays a really big role. And I think it plays a big, going back to my dissertation, I feel like it plays such a bigger role when we have deep economic problems in our society.
Yeah. If men are the providers,
right,
and they can't.
If there are less opportunities for men to be able to meet those expectations, whether, we have a debate on whether that's the right expectation to put on men or not. But like the reality is like historically, those are the expectations that are already there. And then you mix it with like deep economic problems, especially for working class men. And not just working class men anymore. It's like really expanding the economic problems.
Yeah.
I just think it's like a recipe for big problems. Like you combine that with also not teaching folks how to deal with those emotions.
You're going
to see some explosive things, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if you want me. I kind of skipped over some of my like experiences, but so yeah, probably really notable when I was working with Will, But then I think, like, to be honest, probably the most impactful thing I did in grad school was I had this interesting, once again, intuitive moment. I have no idea why I did this, but we had these prac sites, as Betsy knows, like, and one really great thing about our program was there were so many. Like, I think we had like 20 different options for practicums.
20 different like clinical sites.
So, right? Like, you could be at the hospital, you could be at the VA, you could be at a shelter, which is one of my prac sites. And I applied to work at the Women's Resource and Action Center. And somebody told me, no man has ever worked there before.
The program.
And it's the oldest. It's also the oldest women's center in the country.
It is
at a college campus. And I to this day, I don't know why I did that. Like, and it wasn't like to make any sort of point. I just knew there was something there for me. Like, I was like, I want to learn from like
maybe
these women.
I feel like your mother might have.
Yeah, that's probably true. And like, I did want to learn about feminist psychotherapy. I'd read about it. I was like, this sounds like something like I would be interested in, but I want to learn, like, who else do you learn from? Like, these are, it's like, and there was a counseling site there. And so I thought maybe they would be open to it. And serendipitously, they were also having this kind of moment at the Women's Center where they wanted to figure out how to get men more involved with feminist work, like activism work, counseling, things like that. And it was like, I had just showed up on their doorstep. So they interviewed me first. They wanted to check in on who I was. And it was a really great matchup. And they were working on some side programs too. And so they actually had a couple other men that they ended up hiring to do some work on campus with men's group, like fraternities and stuff like that. And if you guys were around for this, but this was in probably 2005 or 2006. And so there was a lot of emphasis on sexual assault issues on campus at that time. There was a lot of training going on. So this was part of that. And I think they even got some funding to do some of this. And that experience, it really completely changed my consciousness in like a significant way. And mostly somebody told me this when I got there, and they just said, mostly just listen. Like, and I was like, okay, got it. And so, I would go, they invited me to all their staff meetings, which were kind of more about social justice stuff that they were doing on campus. And then I was doing counseling work and had a supervisor who was one of the staff there. And then I got like office space. So it was shared with a couple of the other, I think there were grad school or college age women who worked there or had kind of TA type things. And just kind of talked with people and some of it was challenging. They were challenging me. I was challenging my own preconceived ideas about a lot of things in our culture, and it was very eye-opening. And I mean, it just exposed a lot of like blind spots for me being in that space. And I just feel so fortunate that they're willing to let me be in that space and get that experience. While I was there, because I was so inspired, they part of the projects they were doing was they were working with this program called Mentors in Violence Prevention. It still exists now. And basically it's a program. It started, I think they work with all genders now, but it started with trying to work with men to change rape culture, essentially. And so it's basically based on scientific research, using what's called bystander intervention. So bystander intervention is kind of on this premise, and we have really good research to show this with men, that the way they describe it very quickly is that most men's behavior can be easily predicted by looking at the behavior of the men that they spend time with. So the challenge is, instead of trying to target specific men and be like, I want to change their behavior, what if we change the general culture of groups of men? That will actually change the behavior. And there's also some extra research, especially with sexual assault, that that very likely, like on campus sexual assault, which is what we were dealing with at that time, there's actually the group of men that are doing the sexual assaults is actually relatively small, but they tend to be repeat offenders. But that doesn't let everyone else off the hook, because the problem is that a lot of the other men around them are not doing anything about it. They often know that it's happening, or they suspect that it's happening, and they do nothing. In fact, they may be encouraging it. And so that some of the research was showing that, and this is where the theories about rape culture come from, which is that, like the perpetrator might be in a group, like a repeat perpetrator, and they might float a joke, like a offensive joke. And if all the men around them laugh at the joke, they feel validated that my behavior is okay.
Yeah.
And so the goal of the program is, don't do that anymore. Like, you don't have to necessarily stop them from what they're doing, but we're going to stop the culture that encourages them to feel like it's okay to do what they're doing.
Interesting.
And so then what we would do is we would work with groups of men, and we do like role plays, like you're at a party and this is happening, and we practice and we teach those types of interventions. And so I eventually got trained to do those trainings, which is really cool, through RAC. And we would go to frats and other places. Sometimes we got booed out of there. One time, like one of the most amazing experiences, this actually happened to one of my colleagues who was also doing this work, was he literally got booed off the stage at a fraternity. But before he left, he handed out these little pieces of paper and just feedback forms. How did I do? Da, da, da. And he was devastated. He was just like, I don't know if I could do this anymore. And then he read the papers, and so many of them said, we have a serious problem with this. Like, please, we need help. It was almost like these pleas for help. Public. But none of the guys, in fact, they went along with the group of you shouldn't be here, boo. Yeah. But secretly they were there was this cry for help on paper. Really interesting.
I think that's such a beautiful bridge into just our current culture. And I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad to be having this conversation. You and I have already talked at various times about the patriarchal systems and just the harm. Clearly on this podcast, we're always talking to women about our side. And yet men are also being so negatively impacted by it and are suffering in their own ways, and maybe in more silence than women who we're talking to each other. We're talking about it. Yeah. We're having coffee together. So from your perspective as a mental health provider and someone who works with men, how are men doing in this culture? And what are you seeing and observing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Lots of things. There's probably an endless number of ways that patriarchy negatively impacts men. In my work, because I do a lot of trauma work, probably the biggest area that I see it is in terms of abuse and sexual abuse, physical abuse, because, and some of this has to do with some of the stuff we already talked about, at least theoretically, is, the biggest perpetrators of violence against men is men, including sexual violence. And so a lot of the men that I work with, the violence they experienced was from men. And so, I see that as part of this bigger issue. And then the other area, which probably is more universal across clients who've been socialized as men, is something you and Betsy and I talked about a long time ago, which is I describe it as this man box. And so I'll do this activity where we draw on a whiteboard or something. This actually comes from that Mentors in Violence Prevention. So we draw a box, and it usually works well with a group of men. And I used to do this when I worked at the VA. We just a bunch of veterans who are guys, we just work on this. And you basically just write in what, thinking about growing up and the culture that you're in now, what does it mean to be a man? Like, what is okay? And that goes in the box. So we just write stuff. And then we eventually get to the outside, like what's not okay. And eventually you start seeing this pretty clear picture, you know, like some of it's kind of comical where it's, you know, like huge muscles and six pack. And, but then some of it gets more kind of systemic. It's like you have to be straight, you know, on the inside and on the outside. If you're gay in any sort of way or queer in any sort of way, that goes on the outside. And the most powerful thing about the activities, we'll spend, you know, like 30 minutes sometimes doing this, and you see this thing. And I always ask the men, I would say, do you know anyone that looks like this guy inside this box?
Wow.
And usually, like, people might say, like, you know, like Rambo or, you know, Captain America. Probably it's more recent example, you know, like it's like Hollywood examples, maybe. And even those don't fit.
Not real.
Yeah. It's like anyone in your real life, and no one can, like, it's not a real person. And so then we have this discussion about, like, do you feel pressure to be that person? Do you feel pressure to fit in that box? And every guy says 100%.
Yeah.
And like, what does that feel like? And we just talk about that. And it's a lot for a lot of men, you know, like it feels like a lot. And then we, you know, acknowledge, like, do any of you have any of these outside? You don't have to tell us what, but, you know, like some of the outside stuff is like, I cry during like romance movies or something, you know, or like whatever it is, you know, like, and everyone says, yes, of course, you know, like everyone's like, yeah, I have some of those. And do you ever feel ashamed that you have some of those? And we talk about that. And, you know, a lot of people say yes. And so, yeah, I feel like that's part of it. You know, that comes up quite a bit. This kind of, there's a lot of pressure there. And, you know, going back to the one we talked about earlier too, like obviously the provider thing is a big one too. There's just a lot of pressure to maintain this thing that doesn't even exist.
Right.
And to feel really ashamed about parts of you that maybe actually you like, you know,
right,
or you want to like, but it feels like you're not allowed to like. So
do you see maybe some progress happening with younger men, or the younger generation that feels like there's going to be some shifts? We have young boys.
Totally.
And we have these conversations that I'm sure, you know, my husband wasn't having with his parents.
Yeah.
Right. And so do you see kind of a shift happening, maybe a little more awareness?
Yeah. I mean, I work with adolescent boys, and definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's so different than how I grew up. Even my brother's 14 years younger than me, and his peer group like says, I love you to each other. I'm like, we never were allowed to do that.
My son does that with
they like hug each other. Yeah. They like sit close to each other on a couch while watching TV, and they all identify as straight, but like, and I don't even know if they care to say that, but like, so, and that's also another thing. They're not like protecting their sexuality. Like, like all like scary to say that, you know, like, you're not straight or something. They don't, it's just like not an issue for them. It's really interesting. And that's only like probably one down. So yeah, I have a lot of hope. I mean, my way of, you know, that box is probably a good way to look at this, because whenever people are like, well, what are we supposed to do with boys and men? And I think there's a lot of perspectives. I don't think they're necessarily any like ones are necessarily wrong, but I think they're just different perspectives. That one perspective is like, we need to redefine masculinity. And there's a lot of discussions about that going on. And I think those are interesting discussions. And, you know, it's, and I think they're reactions to what we're seeing in the culture, which is like a very specific type of masculinity being portrayed. Yeah. My view as a psychologist and doing this work, I'm less interested in redefining or even defining masculinity in any particular way. I feel like it's more important to expand masculinity. So kind of that box, like I want to move the edges of that box outwards, so that we're like more welcoming of different things into what it means to be a man, rather than trying to create a new box of like, oh, this is what it's like, what it means to be a man now. which I think can potentially create its own sort of problems anyway. So, and so when I do work, like when I do that activity, that's one thing we talk about of like, what would it be like to feel permission to like bring all those things in?
Right. Show your feelings.
Yeah. So you can you can be angry and cry during romance movies or whatever, like you can have, like in terms of like sexuality, it's like you can be straight and gay, actually, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's not, but like I think, and I actually feel like the queer community is teaching us a lot about what it means to expand these things, and I think it's really important because we were all taught these like very binary little boxes about what is. And they don't even match people's real experience.
Right.
So,
what I love about that is it feels more like an human evolution versus trying to, start over. We're evolving and we're, each generation seems to be moving more in that direction of more acceptance.
Yeah, I definitely have hope when I work with, especially with younger folks. It's like, it's kind of amazing sometimes. And, in my work, and I think this is something everyone can do. It's not just like a therapist thing. It's something I think about consciously, but I think parents can do this, and aunts and uncles and, peers. I used to co-lead a men's therapy group here, actually, at the university. And I just learned so much from the men in that group, but also from the supervisor I worked with at the time. And we would have one of our interventions we called permission giving. So permission giving, especially with men's therapy group, so the two therapists were men, myself and like my supervisor. And one thing he taught me was a lot of men need permission to do stuff that's usually considered outside that box. And we have to give them the permission, but not by telling them, we have to show them.
Model it.
Yeah, because you can tell them all day, but but if they see a man cry in the group when somebody says something really devastating, that all of a sudden gives people permission of like, oh, I like these men, I respect these men, and they're showing me that it's okay. And so he did such a good job, like showing how that works. And so that's really stuck with me in my clinical work, but I also feel like that's important just in general as a society of like, are we giving men permission to even just to explore what it like means to be themselves? So I think about that a lot, just the permission giving thing. I like that term too. It's like so
I do too.
I love that. Beautiful. And this is reminding me so much of what we so often talk about in this podcast, but from the feminine perspective of that, there are these boxes and we've been bound in these very small and tight boxes.
There's a box
part of our
for sure.
is getting outside of the box. And so I love expanding it that men are also in these small boxes. But I'm appreciating how you're talking about maybe we don't have to get rid of the box. Can we all expand our boxes?
Yeah.
So that it's not such a narrow place that we can act in, but there's lots of possibility and there's lots of holding of what feels diametrically opposed at times. Like your example of like,
paradoxical thing.
You could be angry and kind. You could be gay and straight, you know, that we can hold all kinds of possibilities.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important for all of us, right?
Yeah, I think you might have just changed our whole podcast to getting
out. You don't need to get out of the box. We just need to expand the box. Thank you.
My job is done.
You've evolved us just right now.
I know. I do want to ask, because one of the things we've talked about is I feel so excited. We have a man here. Let's ask the question.
What else do we need to know?
I will represent all men.
Okay, yes, please do. We've talked about how it does seem that patriarchy is dying off, or there's this last push, that there's this feminine energy that's rising and getting stronger. And are men feeling scared? Like, is there a backlash? Are men feeling that, even if it's at a subconscious level, the fear of losing grip on power and prestige and hierarchy and all of that. I think we've made that assumption that's what's going on, but I'm like, is that actually happening?
Right. Or any of those conversations.
And again, we know there's lots of men and lots of different types of men, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I mean, that's a hard question.
I know.
I mean, I don't know for sure. I have some theories on this. I do feel like it is, feminism and expansive, like expanding the box, and like you talked about the rising in feminine energy, which I do feel too. I think it's offensive and threatening to people who have been able to benefit from a power and control perspective from it not being like that.
Yeah.
Right. I think though there's a lot of men who don't benefit from that.
Yeah.
And
don't want it that way.
No.
Right.
Yeah. And also some who've been victims from that same system. And those, like, I have kind of a sample bias because those are the men that usually go to therapy.
That's true. You might have a different sample size.
Yeah. So I think a lot of men, who've experienced trauma or who've experienced violence in their life eventually show up in therapy. And I do think it's helpful. This is where the feminist psychotherapist in me comes out, which is I feel like it's really valuable to understand some of those bigger things, because what I find with the folks that I work with is it really helps with self-compassion, because I feel like a lot of men, I mean, not just men, all folks, when you've experienced violence, it's really common to blame yourself.
Yeah.
And not to realize like there's this bigger thing going on that isn't your fault.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people that aha moment is really helpful.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that's the huge benefit of feminist psychotherapy, is the ability to see things from a systems perspective. But that alone, like, that's a fun intellectual game you can play. To where it comes down to real life is the ability to let go of self-blame and have self-compassion that this wasn't my fault. Like, this is a systemic problem. And sure, we are all contributing to that in some way. We have to take responsibility for that. But like, it's not my fault that happened to me.
Yeah.
And it's not even that other person's fault always, right? Like directly. They also have to take responsibility for their behaviors, but like there's something bigger going on that's a huge problem, and we all also need to work on that.
Yeah.
And I love that about that therapeutic approach, and it feels like it, in my experience, works really well in terms of like trauma healing for people. It's like a really big component of it for me.
Do you think it can also then lead into more just general compassion for others?
Absolutely.
When you feel it for yourself, suddenly you look at the world differently as you create your own, increase your
compassion for yourself, others, and, to be honest, anger, which is also important, right? Like appropriate, like a lot of times people who experience trauma have a lot of anger, but they just direct it towards themselves or maybe just towards one person. And once we have this realization, and this is where, I learned this from the folks at RAC, there's a lot of angry people there, but it's like you realize like, oh, this is justified anger.
Right.
And they're channeling it.
Right.
Yeah, they're channeling it in this like amazing way where they're trying to protect people and they're trying to get the word out, like what the problems are, and they're trying to make sure this never happens again. And that anger, like, I'm here for it,
Yeah.
And I also feel like that can be, and we would see this there at RAC, but like that can be incredibly healing for people.
Yeah.
To have a place, like a place to put that anger that feels justified and helpful and useful, right?
Right. Action can help.
Yeah.
Move people
absolutely.
forward, right?
Yeah. So it's almost like, once again, expansive, like we're like allowing people to feel the whole gamut of emotions that they feel, rather than, like, I think I'm not a big fan of like restricting.
Yeah.
We call it increasing the repertoire, like.
Yeah. So to kind of start to close our conversation, which has been so rich and so multifactorial, and I knew it would be. What is, I feel like we should still ask him the last question. We're going to modify it. But, from your perspective, where we are at this point in history, working with men, working in lots of working with people all over the world. You work with people online from all over the world. Any little piece of hope or guidance, wisdom that you have for our listeners? I know it's a really broad question, but you're such a wise, settled being. Like, what's keeping you hopeful these days?
It's a good question. I mean, honestly, doing like the work that I do keeps me very hopeful. And I always feel, I mean, I think a lot of therapists feel like this. Like, I feel so privileged and lucky to have a job where I get to know the real worlds of real people. And I also like reflecting on some of the problems in our world. I feel like that's such a big problem, is like we know people through CNN or Fox News or whatever, like we know people through Instagram, we know people through all these
personas,
mediums, but not many of us know the real lives of real people, except for maybe a couple people in our lives. And I think, there's definitely been a pullback from that. And, like people like having fewer third spaces in places where we commune. And I just feel really fortunate. And I often think, like, if I didn't have this job, I might have some pretty wackadoodle ideas about how people work. And I just feel like it keeps me really grounded of like, okay,
people at their core are.
Yeah. Like, just, I don't know, I mean, like, people have challenges, of course, and all that stuff. But I don't know, it just helps me not get a really overly distorted view. I just, like a lot of the mediums, I mean, you guys probably talk about this, but like, they're just so extreme. Like, everything's so extreme. And then the most extreme people get the biggest platforms on these things. And that's not really the real world. And so I just feel like it keeps me grounded. And I guess that would be my reminder to people, is that like, you can't tell people this. You just have to invite them to like, go have coffee with somebody, put down your phone, go talk, go hang out.
Real conversation.
And I know that sounds like so easy, and sometimes it's not that easy, but I just think as a society, we probably need to have that more.
Yeah, to get back to that.
Yeah, we have to figure that one out. It's tough.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and not even like, I know people are like, go cross the aisle and talk to someone. You don't have to do, that's hard. That's really hard. Just like talk to your actual neighbor, or talk, some of us haven't talked to our best friends in a while. And it's like, find out what's going on in their life and those type of things. Start there. You don't have to. I think we're like so big on like doing the hardest thing in the world. I'm like, that's like a 10 out of 10 challenge. Start somewhere else.
Small things I sense and feel we're starting to recognize the small things, maybe the big things.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's part of it, is just social connection, simple reaching out to one another.
Yeah.
Well, Ren, we love to ask this question. I'm guessing your mom has a lot of wild woman archetypal energy.
Oh yeah, she's very wild.
So does he. I think that's the beautiful part.
You have certainly garnered some of that energy from your upbringing and your work. So tell us, for you, and now we're going to say not getting out of the box, but expanding your box so large. Which door do you think you walked through in your development to kind of get to that spot? So if you have a deep scar, that is a door. If you have an old story, that is a door. If you love the sky and the water so much you can almost not bear it, that is a door. And if you yearn for a deeper life, a full life, a sane life, that is a door.
Yeah, a lot of those resonate with me, actually. I mean, honestly, for me, and we didn't talk about this a lot, but it probably is the deep scar.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think growing up and, other times in my life, even recently, I've had those dark nights of the soul. And I think that's true. Honestly, I think that's true for a lot of therapists. Otherwise, like, there's a reason why we get into this profession and feel like a affinity to people who are going through similar things. Yeah. But I feel like those experiences, despite how hard some of them have been, have all taught me so much. Just help. I mean, they've been lessons to me about how to understand, the people that I want to work with more, and also just people in my life, right? Yeah. And myself. So yeah, I feel like the scar one resonates the most, but I also like feel a lot of those other ones too. Like, those are all really lovely.
Yeah.
Well, how can people find you if they want to work with you? What do you have coming up that might be of interest?
So I'm a therapist in Iowa City. And I used to live in Minnesota, so I actually work with clients in Minnesota, and then I actually work for international private practice. So I actually work with folks that live in other countries, including expats in other countries. So I have a website. It's summergoldcounseling.com. That's the name of my practice. So you can find information there if you want. And then through Heartland Yoga, we're doing some workshops coming up. There's going to be, I think it's at the end of February. I don't know when this comes out, but
we'll get it in the show notes for sure.
Yeah. So basically, there's going to be, long story short, you can read about them, but there's going to be 4 different talks. 2 are just normal talks for anyone who wants to show up. They're all going to be online, so you can do it from anywhere. And they're basically on emotion regulation, like how to use some psychological science-based emotion regulation skills. But then the second set of workshops, so the first 2 are that, and then the second set are similar, but we wanting to do it with families. So this is an idea that I had, was invite your teenagers, invite your mom, invite whoever you want, your roommate, and let's do a family one, because I feel deeply about if families can learn these skills together, that's gonna be helpful. And even just encouraging each other, there's certain you can almost learn a certain language as a family of how to a skill-based language for emotion regulation. So, and just a lot of it comes from the work that I've done. I've done a lot of group work, and it's really exciting when you see that happen. You see sisters who are calling each other out in a loving way of using their skills around regulating their emotions with each other.
I love that.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So that's coming up. That should be fun. And we'll probably do some more stuff if those people like those.
Well, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this. I've been doing yoga with you for a while.
I know.
One of my favorite yogis, and you are just so wise, and your background is so fascinating. And I see these through lines. Think about you tromping all over the United States, right? And at a young age, and kind of being a symbol of peace. And here you are.
Name and going to peace rallies.
That's surprising to me.
It's such a through line for who you are and what you represent, and how it feels just to sit with you for an hour.
Yeah.
So I know your clients are very lucky. Yes. So thanks for this time and sharing all the wisdom.
Thanks, Ren.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Come back and rewild with us again next week.